Have you ever watched someone make a choice, a quiet, unremarkable choice, and known, deep in your bones, that it was going to change everything? That's what this story is about. Not a hero, not a headline. Just one person who did what most people wouldn't at the worst possible moment, for a stranger who turned out to be anything but ordinary. Stay with me. This one's worth it. The morning Theo Callahan almost threw his entire future away started with a broken zipper. Theo Callahan, 26 years old, black Canadian, a lanky man with close-cropped locks and a face that still looked younger than his age, stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his one-bedroom apartment in Hamilton, Ontario, tugging at the zipper of the only blazer he owned. It was a navy blue thing he'd bought secondhand from Value Village 3 years ago, slightly too wide in the shoulders, slightly too short in the sleeves. He'd had it dry cleaned twice in the last month, both times in preparation for interviews that hadn't panned out. This morning was different, or so he told himself. He finally got the zipper unstuck, pulled it smooth, and checked the time on his phone. 7:42 a.m. The interview was at King Street Capitol, downtown Toronto, at 10 a.m. He needed to catch the 8:15 GO train from Hamilton GO Center, or the whole thing was over before it started. He had exactly 33 minutes to walk to the station. Theo worked, or had worked, until 6 weeks ago, as a junior financial analyst at a small credit union. Layoffs, restructuring, the usual language people use when they mean, you're first out the door. He had a degree in finance from McMaster. He had 3 years of clean, solid work history. He had a reference letter from his supervisor that called him meticulous and dependable, which was the kind of praise that sounded good in print and meant nothing when the economy shrank. He'd sent out 41 applications in 6 weeks. King Street Capitol had called him back. He grabbed his folder, resume, cover letter, 2 copies each, tucked it under his arm, and walked out the door. The morning was October gray, that particular Hamilton gray that felt less like weather, and more like the sky had simply decided to stop trying. The leaves on Barton Street were wet and matted against the pavement. Theo walked fast, collar turned up, folder pressed to his chest. He had rehearsed his answers on the GO train the week before, just talking quietly to himself in his seat while the woman beside him pretended not to notice. He'd practiced his handshake in front of the mirror. He'd looked up the names of King Street Capitol's 3 senior partners and memorized them so he could drop them naturally into conversation. He was ready. He was so close. He turned the corner onto Hunter Street, and that's when he saw her. She was sitting on the bottom step of a concrete staircase that led up to a closed medical clinic, still shuttered at this hour. 6 years old, maybe 7, small, with dark braids coming loose from their ties, wearing a yellow raincoat over a purple sweater, one pink boot on her foot, the other sitting on the step beside her. She wasn't crying loudly. It was worse than that. She was crying in that quiet, exhausted way that children do when they've been at it for a while and have run out of loud. Theo stopped. He looked at her. He looked up the street, down the street. A few people walked past on the far side. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked. He checked his watch. 7:51 a.m. He looked at her again. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dark brown and very large and very wet. Was this the best or worst decision he would ever make? He walked over. He crouched down to her level, not looming, not standing over her, actually getting low on the cold concrete step until they were eye to eye. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" She shook her head. "Are you lost?" A small nod. "What's your name?" she sniffled. Ivy. He said it back like he was confirming something important. "Okay, I'm Theo. Can you tell me where your mom or dad is?" "My grandma." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "She was right here. She stopped to tie my boot and she told me to wait, and then I waited and she didn't come back." Theo felt something tighten in his chest. A grandmother who'd told a child to wait. That meant the grandmother hadn't left voluntarily. How long ago was that? Ivy looked at him with the expression of a child who doesn't fully understand the concept of elapsed time. "A long time," she said. He stood up and looked around more carefully now. There was a small coffee shop across the street, just opening. A pharmacy, not yet open. The medical clinic behind them. An alley to the left, and then he saw it. At the base of the alley, about 20 meters away, something dark on the ground. He took Ivy's hand without asking. "Stay right next to me, okay?" He walked to the alley entrance fast, and what he found there made his stomach drop. An elderly woman, white-haired, in a gray wool coat, was sitting on the ground with her back against the brick wall, her face ashen, one hand pressed to her chest. She was conscious but breathing in a shallow, labored way that was immediately, unmistakably wrong. Her eyes found him, and she opened her mouth, but nothing came out except a small, frightened sound. "Don't try to talk," Theo said. He was already on his phone. "I'm calling for help right now." He called 911. He gave the address. He told them what he was seeing. Elderly woman, possible cardiac event, conscious but labored breathing. He stayed on the line. He did not hang up. He crouched beside the woman and held her hand and told her that help was coming and that Ivy was safe and right beside him. And when Ivy started to cry again, he put his free arm around her small shoulders and held her there, in the alley off Hunter Street, until he could hear the siren in the distance. He did not think about the train. He thought about it later. At the moment, he did not think about it once. The paramedics arrived in under 6 minutes. Two of them, a young woman with red hair named Danny, who immediately took over with the elderly woman, and a larger man named Dev, who gently redirected Ivy away from the scene while they worked. Theo stayed. Because there was nobody else. He learned the woman's name from the health card in her coat pocket. Millicent Oforiwa Asante, 78 years old, emergency contact listed as one person. He gave this information to the paramedics and stood back while they worked. Millicent Asante stabilized. She was going to be okay. The paramedic, Danny, told him that quietly while they were loading her onto the stretcher. "She's lucky you found her when you did." Another 20 minutes in the cold, and this would be a different conversation. They needed him to come to the hospital to wait with Ivy until family could be reached. The social worker on call was unavailable until 9. There was no one else who knew this child. Theo looked at the time. 8:34 a.m. He was already going to miss the 8:15 train. He could still make the 9:05. It would be tight. He'd arrive at Union just before 10. He'd have to run to the office. He'd be late, but he could explain. He could. Ivy slipped her hand into his. She didn't ask anything. She just stood there in her one pink boot, holding his hand, her face turned up at him, like he was the only fixed point in a world that had gone sideways on her. Theo Callahan closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then he got into the ambulance. Hamilton General was loud and fluorescent and smelled like coffee and industrial cleaner. Theo sat in the ER waiting area with Ivy in the chair next to him, the two of them eating graham crackers from a package a nurse had produced from somewhere. Ivy had stopped crying. She had, in the way of small children presented with crackers and a calm adult, achieved a kind of fragile equilibrium. At 9:10 a.m., Theo stepped outside and called King Street Capital. He had already drafted the call in his head. He would explain. He would be professional. He would apologize without being groveling, and he would ask, quietly, without expectation, whether there was any possibility of rescheduling. The call lasted 4 minutes. The woman who answered, her name was Fiona, and she had the tone of someone who had heard every excuse ever invented, listened, and then she told him, not unkindly but not warmly, that the interview panel was fully booked for the next 3 weeks, that they had other strong candidates, and that they would keep his resume on file. Theo stood on the sidewalk outside Hamilton General and looked at the sky. It was still gray. He went back inside. He sat with Ivy for another hour and 40 minutes. He learned that she was 6 3/4, a distinction she considered very important. He learned that her favorite color was green, not yellow, despite the raincoat. He learned that Millicent was her great-grandmother, who she called Gran Mill, and that they took the bus together every Thursday morning to go to the market on James Street North. At 10:47, a man walked into the waiting room. He was perhaps 55. mixed race, with silver at his temples, and the kind of bearing that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. He was wearing a charcoal suit with no tie, and he moved through the hospital corridor the way people move when they know exactly where they're going and expect others to clear the way. He was not unkind looking. He was simply the kind of man who took up space as a matter of habit. His name was Desmond Kwame Asante, and he was the founder and chief executive officer of Asante Capital Partners, one of the largest black-owned private equity firms in Canada, with offices in Toronto, Montreal, and Calgary. Ivy launched herself off the chair and into his arms. Uncle Des. Desmond Asante held his great-aunt's granddaughter tight for a long moment, his face pressed against her braids. When he straightened up, his eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lights. He turned to Theo. He took in the second-hand blazer, the folder slightly bent now from being clutched in an ambulance, the Value Village shoes, which were good quality but showing their age. He took in the whole picture of Theo Callahan, 26 years old, sitting in a hospital waiting room on a Thursday morning when he was clearly supposed to be somewhere else. "You're the one who found her," he said. It wasn't a question. "I found them both, actually," Theo said. "Mrs. Asante is stable. They're saying she can probably go home tomorrow if she rests." Desmond sat down in the chair on the other side of Ivy. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at Theo in that particular way that people look when they are reassessing something. "I'm Desmond Asante," he said. He held out his hand. Theo shook it. "Theo Callahan." "You missed something this morning," Desmond said. Not accusatory. Observational. Something important. Theo glanced at his folder, which was sitting on the seat beside him. He had not made a secret of it. "A job interview," he said. "What kind?" "Financial analyst. King Street Capital." Desmond's expression did not change. He looked at Theo for another long moment. Then he looked at Ivy, who had curled up in her chair and was showing signs of falling asleep, the cracker still in her hand. "You stayed," Desmond said. "Even after you missed it. You stayed." Theo looked at Ivy. There was nobody else. It was the simplest thing he'd said all morning. It was also, he realized, the most true. Theo did not hear from Desmond Asante for 11 days. He did not expect to. He had not given Desmond his number. Desmond had taken it from the hospital contact form before they'd left, and Theo had not known whether that meant anything or nothing. He told himself it was probably nothing. He told himself this firmly, repeatedly, as he continued to apply for jobs and do phone screens and receive polite rejections and keep the apartment clean and eat properly and go for runs along the waterfront, because movement was the only thing that kept the anxiety from settling into something heavier. On the 12th day, his phone rang. Unknown number, Toronto area code. "Theo Callahan? Speaking. This is Desmond Asante. I'd like you to come to our office in Toronto. Next Tuesday, if you're available, 2 o'clock. Theo sat down on the edge of his bed. "Is this?" He stopped. "Can I ask what this is regarding?" "I want to talk to you about a position," Desmond said. "Junior analyst, to start. But I'd like to tell you more in person." There was a pause. It was not an awkward pause. It was the kind of pause that happens when something that should have words around it doesn't have any yet. "How's your great-aunt?" Theo asked. And Desmond Asante, CEO, founder, the kind of man who took up space as a matter of habit, said, "She's good. She's home. She sends her thanks," in a voice that was quieter than anything he'd said before. "I'm glad," Theo said. "Tuesday," Desmond said. 2 o'clock. "I'll be there," Theo said. He was there. The offices of Asante Capital Partners occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a glass tower on Bay Street. The lobby was clean and minimal and had the kind of quietness that expensive buildings have, where sound gets absorbed by design. Theo signed in at the front desk, and the receptionist, a young Somali-Canadian woman named Haina, who smiled at him with zero condescension and offered him water, walked him to a meeting room with a view of the lake. He sat across the table from Desmond Asante and a woman named Claudette Voss Renault, 43, the firm's head of portfolio analytics, a francophone Quebecois with sharp eyes and zero patience for performance. She had read his resume twice. She asked him questions that were not about his attitude, or his personality, or where he saw himself in 5 years. She asked him about methodology, about his approach to evaluating risk in mid-market portfolios, about a specific kind of discrepancy she'd noticed in his credit union numbers, and whether he'd caught it or someone else had. He had caught it. He told her how. She looked at Desmond. Something passed between them. The conversation lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes. At the end, Desmond folded his hands on the table and looked at Theo the way he had in the hospital waiting room. That measured, reassessing look. "I need to be honest with you," Desmond said. "I didn't call you because of what you did for Ivy and for Gran Mill. I called you because of how you did it. A lot of people would have stopped. Fewer would have gotten in the ambulance. Almost nobody would have stayed for 2 hours and then called the interview to apologize for missing it rather than just disappearing. That kind of," he paused, "steadiness. That's hard to find." Theo said nothing. He had learned, a long time ago, that some sentences were best received in silence. "What I'm offering you," Desmond continued, "is a junior analyst position at a compensation level slightly above what King Street would have offered. I know their ranges, with a 6-month performance review and a clear path to senior analyst if the work holds up." He named a number. Theo kept his face still. Inside, something that had been wound very tight for 6 weeks released. "I'd like that," Theo said. "Good." Desmond nodded once. "One more thing." He looked at Theo carefully. "Gran Mill wants to have you over for dinner. She's making groundnut soup. I'd strongly advise not saying no." For the first time that day, for the first time in a long time, actually, Theo Callahan smiled. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said. The groundnut soup was extraordinary. Millicent Oforiwa Asante, 78 years old, sat at the head of her kitchen table in her apartment in the West End of Hamilton. Yes, she had insisted on Hamilton. She would not be moved to Toronto. She didn't care how many floors the building had, and watched Theo eat with the sharp, satisfied attention of a woman who takes feeding people very seriously. Ivy was there too, in green this time, her actual favorite color, perched on a booster seat and talking continuously about a book she was reading about deep-sea fish. "The anglerfish," Ivy announced, "has a light on its head, that it grows itself. From its own body. That is remarkable," Theo said. "I know," Ivy said. She was very serious about it. "I want one, a light or an anglerfish." Ivy considered this. Both. Millicent refilled Theo's bowl without asking. She moved slowly, carefully, the way someone moves when they are still listening to their body after it has frightened them. But her eyes were bright and her hands were steady. "You didn't have to stay," she told him when Ivy had gone to find her book. "In that waiting room. You had somewhere to be." "I know," Theo said. "Most people," she said, "calculate whether a thing is worth it, whether the time is worth it, whether the person is worth it." She looked at him steadily. "You didn't calculate." Theo thought about that. He thought about the 8 seconds he'd stood on the sidewalk looking down at Ivy on her step. He thought about the 2 seconds he'd closed his eyes in the ambulance. "I might have calculated a little," he admitted. Millicent's mouth curved. "And what did you decide?" He thought about Ivy's hand slipping into his. The weight of it. The absolute, uncomplicated trust in that small gesture. "That it didn't matter," he said. "Whatever I was going to." Millicent nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she already suspected. "Good boy," she said, and refilled his bowl again. "Now I want to talk to you for a second, because if you've been with me this whole time, you already know what this story is really about. It's not about luck, it's not about being in the right place at the right time. Theo Callahan wasn't rewarded because he impressed the right person. He was rewarded because he was the kind of person who doesn't stop doing the right thing when it costs him something. And here's what I keep thinking about. How many people walked past Ivy on that step? How many of them were running late? How many of them had somewhere important to be, something riding on the morning, something they were afraid to lose? How many of them did the math in their head and kept walking? I'm not judging. I've kept walking before. Most of us have. But Theo didn't. And the thing is, he wasn't waiting for a reward. He had no reason to believe there was one coming. He got into that ambulance knowing, clearly, that he was going to miss his interview. He stayed in that waiting room, knowing that the callback probably wasn't coming. He did it because Ivy's hand was in his and there was nobody else. That's the part that gets me, not the outcome. The choice, made without any promise of return. I think about that a lot these days, especially here in Canada, where we like to believe we're the kind of country that stops for people. And mostly, I think, we try to be. But it's easy to be kind when it's convenient. The real question is what you do when it costs you something. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of a time you helped someone, or a time someone helped you, or a time you wish you'd made a different choice, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. Tell me your story. Those are the ones that stay with me the longest. And if you're new here, welcome to DELL Stories. We tell stories like this one, about ordinary people who turn out to be remarkable, about choices that seem small but land like something much bigger. If that's the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe, hit the bell. Pass this along to someone who needs to hear it today. Because someone out there does. They always do.